Listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you could determine whether your retirement lasts for decades or collapses halfway through your life. This is not theory, not motivational talk, and not something you can afford to misunderstand. This is about how retirees actually run out of money, and how many of them never see it coming until it's too late to fix it. Today we're talking about the 4% rule. You've probably heard of it. Financial advisors mention it constantly, articles quote it religiously, and millions of retirees build their entire retirement plan around it. The idea sounds simple and comforting. Withdraw about 4% of your retirement savings each year, adjust for inflation, and your money should last roughly 30 years. Simple, clean, and reassuring. But here's the problem with simple. Simplicity can be dangerous when people stop asking questions. And that's exactly what's happening right now across America. Before I get into exactly why this rule can either protect your retirement or quietly destroy it, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. Smash it. This channel exists for one reason: to help you retire with control, clarity, and confidence, not hope and guesswork. We don't do hype here. We don't sugarcoat things. We give you strategies that actually hold up when markets fall and inflation bites. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's make sure you don't become another retirement statistic. At its core, the 4% rule tries to answer the one question that every retiree eventually faces. How much can I safely withdraw each year without running out of money? Not how much do I want to spend, and not how long do I hope my savings last, but how much can I withdraw without breaking the system? That distinction matters more than most people realize, and it's where the mistakes begin. The rule was developed in the early 1990s by Bill Benjen, a former financial advisor with an engineering background. After hearing the same concern from client after client about how to spend retirement money without running out, he decided to analyze historical market data instead of relying on intuition or guesswork. He studied decades of returns, including some of the worst periods in U.S. financial history. The Great Depression, the inflation-heavy 1970s, major market crashes, periods of stagflation. He ran the numbers through every nightmare scenario you can imagine. His conclusion was startling. If retirees withdrew no more than about 4.2% in the first year of retirement and adjusted that amount for inflation each year, their portfolios had roughly a 90% chance of lasting at least 30 years. In some of his test cases, portfolios lasted 50 years or more. That research reshaped retirement planning forever. It gave people a number, a target, something concrete to plan around. But here's what most people miss, and this is critical. Benjen did not promise certainty, and he did not claim this approach would work for everyone. A 90% success rate still implies real risk. That means a 10% chance of failure, and that 10% represents real people running out of money in their 70s and 80s. Let me walk you through a simple example so this doesn't stay abstract. Suppose you retire with $1 million saved across your retirement accounts. Using the 4% rule, you would withdraw $40,000 in your first year of retirement. That income would typically be supplemented by Social Security, maybe a pension, maybe rental income. The 4% rule is about what you take from your portfolio, not your total income. In the second year, you would increase that withdrawal to account for inflation. If inflation were 3%, your withdrawal would rise to $41,200, regardless of how the market performed.
This is where people often stop thinking critically, and this is where the danger starts. The rule assumes withdrawals increase steadily every single year, even when markets fall, even when your portfolio loses value. If your portfolio declines from $1 million to $950,000 because of a market downturn, the rule still tells you to raise your withdrawal to keep pace with inflation. You're taking more money out of a smaller pot. That rigidity is both the strength and the weakness of the 4% rule, and understanding that tension is essential before you bet your retirement on it. To understand whether the 4% rule makes sense for you, you need to understand the conditions under which it actually works. The rule was never designed as a universal solution. It was based on a very specific type of retiree living under a very specific set of assumptions. When your situation lines up with those assumptions, the rule can be a reasonable starting point. When it doesn't, following it blindly can create serious risk that compounds over time. The 4% rule tends to work best for retirees with a traditional retirement timeline. That means retiring in your mid-60s, expecting a retirement of about 25 to 30 years, and holding a diversified portfolio with a meaningful allocation to stocks for growth and bonds for stability. It also assumes that you are emotionally disciplined, meaning you can stick to your plan during market downturns without panic selling or abandoning your strategy. Those behavioral assumptions are just as important as the math, maybe more important. I've seen perfect mathematical plans destroyed by emotional decisions made during a single bad quarter. The rule also works better when a retiree has multiple income sources. If your portfolio withdrawals are only part of your income, supplemented by Social Security, a pension, or rental income, the pressure on your investments is lower. In those cases, the 4% rule can act as a guideline rather than a hard limit, providing structure without forcing rigid decisions. But if you're relying almost entirely on your portfolio for income, every percentage point matters more, and the margin for error shrinks dramatically. However, the rule begins to break down when real-world variables enter the picture, and this is where most people get into trouble. One of the biggest issues is longevity. People are living longer than ever before. A 65-year-old today has a real chance of living into their 90s, maybe beyond. That's not a 30-year retirement. That's 35 years, maybe 40. The longer your retirement lasts, the more damaging early market losses become. This is known as sequence of returns risk, and it's something the 4% rule does not actively manage. If you retire right before a major market crash and keep withdrawing according to the rule, you can deplete your portfolio far faster than the historical averages would suggest. Another major challenge is inflation, and I'm not talking about the polite 2% to 3% inflation the rule assumes. I'm talking about the real inflation you experience in retirement. While the rule accounts for inflation mathematically, it assumes relatively stable and predictable inflation over time. Real inflation does not behave that way. Periods of elevated inflation can erode purchasing power far faster than expected, especially for the expenses that matter most in retirement: healthcare, housing, and long-term care. Healthcare inflation often runs at double the general inflation rate. A fixed withdrawal strategy that increases every year regardless of market conditions can put significant strain on a portfolio during these periods. Spending behavior is another weak point that destroys the mathematical elegance of the rule. Retirement spending is rarely consistent year to year. Early retirement often involves higher spending on travel, hobbies, and lifestyle upgrades. You're healthy, you're active, you want to enjoy the freedom you worked decades to achieve. Later years may bring rising medical and long-term care costs that dwarf your earlier spending. The middle years might be lighter. The 4% rule assumes a smooth, predictable spending path that increases steadily with inflation. Real life looks more like waves, with peaks and valleys that the rule doesn't account for. When spending spikes unexpectedly because of a health crisis or a family emergency, retirees often compensate by withdrawing more, which undermines the entire framework. Market volatility further complicates everything. The rule assumes you will continue withdrawing according to plan regardless of market conditions. You'll stay disciplined, you'll stay the course, you'll ignore the noise. In reality, many retirees struggle to maintain discipline when markets decline 20%, 30%, or more. Emotional reactions during downturns, such as selling assets at the worst possible time or abandoning long-term strategies out of fear, can cause far more damage than a slightly higher withdrawal rate ever would. This leads to the most important realization. The 4% rule is not broken, but it is incomplete. It provides structure, not certainty. It offers a baseline, not a guarantee. Retirees who treat it as a flexible starting point tend to fare better than those who treat it as an unbreakable law carved in stone.
By now, it should be absolutely clear that the biggest weakness of the 4% rule is not the math itself, but the rigidity with which it's often applied. Retirement is not a fixed equation. Markets move, inflation changes, expenses fluctuate, and personal circumstances evolve. A strategy that refuses to adapt to reality eventually breaks under pressure, even if it started with sound assumptions and perfect historical data. One of the most effective improvements to the traditional 4% rule is introducing flexibility into withdrawals. Instead of increasing spending every year automatically like clockwork, flexible strategies allow retirees to adjust withdrawals based on market performance and portfolio health. In strong market years, when your portfolio grows significantly, you may be able to increase spending comfortably without adding risk. In weaker years, when markets decline, you reduce withdrawals slightly to give your portfolio time to recover. This simple adjustment, this willingness to be responsive rather than rigid, dramatically reduces the risk of running out of money. Research consistently shows that small, temporary spending cuts during market downturns can significantly extend portfolio longevity. The key insight here is that the adjustments do not have to be drastic. You don't have to cut your lifestyle in half. Even reducing withdrawals by 5% to 10% during bad years can preserve capital and improve long-term outcomes. The goal is not deprivation or sacrifice. The goal is responsiveness and sustainability. Another approach that works well involves setting guardrails around spending. Instead of committing to a fixed percentage every year, retirees establish upper and lower limits for withdrawals. If the portfolio performs well and grows beyond expectations, withdrawals can increase within a predefined range. If the portfolio declines below a certain threshold, spending is temporarily reduced. This creates a self-correcting system that balances lifestyle stability with financial sustainability. You're not flying blind, and you're not locked into a rigid formula that ignores reality. Flexibility also means recognizing that retirement income does not need to come from a single source. Coordinating withdrawals with Social Security claiming strategies, pensions, annuities, and even part-time income can reduce the strain on investment portfolios. Delaying Social Security, for example, can act as a form of longevity insurance by increasing guaranteed income later in life, which allows for lower portfolio withdrawals in the early years when sequence of returns risk is highest. Another critical factor is asset allocation. The original 4% rule assumed a balanced mix of roughly 50% stocks and 50% bonds, but that allocation may not suit every retiree. Some retirees may benefit from holding more growth assets to combat inflation over a long retirement, while others may prioritize stability and income. The key is that asset allocation should align with withdrawal strategy, not exist in isolation. These decisions need to work together. Behavior plays a central role in all of this, and I cannot emphasize this enough. A flexible strategy only works if the retiree understands the plan and commits to following it. Panic-driven decisions during market downturns can undo even the most carefully designed strategy. Education, realistic expectations, and clear guidelines help retirees stay disciplined when emotions run high and headlines scream disaster. Perhaps the most important shift in mindset is moving away from the idea of perfect withdrawals. Precision is far less important than adaptability. Retirement success is not about extracting the maximum possible income every single year. It's about maintaining control, preserving optionality, and avoiding irreversible mistakes. A slightly lower withdrawal that preserves flexibility is far more powerful than an aggressive plan that looks perfect on paper but leaves no room for error when reality hits. How to use the 4% rule the smart way? At this point, the real value of the 4% rule should be crystal clear. It was never meant to be a promise or a guarantee or some magical formula that works for everyone. It was designed as a framework, a way to bring structure and discipline to one of the hardest questions in retirement planning: how to turn a lifetime of savings into sustainable income. Used correctly, it can provide clarity and confidence. Used blindly, it can create a false sense of security that leads to disaster. The most important takeaway is that the 4% rule is a starting point, not a destination. It gives retirees a reference point for what a historically sustainable withdrawal rate has looked like under certain conditions. But your retirement does not exist in a spreadsheet from 1994. It exists in a world of longer lifespans, unpredictable inflation, volatile markets, and personal circumstances that change over time. Your retirement is unique, and your strategy needs to reflect that reality. Smart retirement planning starts with understanding your own situation. That includes how long you expect retirement to last, how much flexibility you have in your spending, what other income sources you can rely on, and how comfortable you are with market fluctuations. A retiree with guaranteed income from Social Security and a pension will approach withdrawals very differently from someone relying almost entirely on investment accounts. The 4% rule does not account for those differences, but you must. Another critical factor is behavior. and this is where most people fail. No strategy works if you abandon it during stressful periods. Retirees who succeed over the long term are not the ones who squeeze out the highest possible withdrawals every year. They're the ones who stay disciplined, adjust when necessary, and avoid emotional decisions. Flexibility, patience, and consistency matter far more than hitting an exact percentage. I've seen conservative plans succeed and aggressive plans fail, and the difference almost always comes down to behavior under pressure.
It's also essential to revisit your plan regularly. Retirement is not a one-time calculation you make at age 65 and never touch again. Market conditions change, tax laws evolve, healthcare costs rise, and family needs shift. Reviewing your withdrawal strategy every year or two allows you to make small adjustments before small problems turn into large ones. This ongoing process is what separates sustainable retirement income from strategies that fail quietly over time. The 4% rule still has a place in modern retirement planning, but that place is advisory, not absolute. It can help you estimate whether your savings are in the right range and whether your spending expectations are realistic. It can help frame conversations with financial advisors and guide early planning decisions. What it cannot do is replace judgment, adaptability, and thoughtful planning tailored to your specific life. If you remember one thing from this entire discussion, remember this: retirement success is not about maximizing income in the short term. It's about maintaining control for the rest of your life. A plan that allows you to adjust, respond, and protect yourself against uncertainty is far more powerful than one that looks perfect on paper but crumbles under real-world pressure. Now here's my challenge to you. If this breakdown helped you think differently about retirement income, hit that subscribe button and become a member of this channel. This is where we focus on protecting your money, extending its lifespan, and avoiding the mistakes that cost retirees their independence. Smash that like button so more people can see this message and avoid blindly following a rule without understanding it. And drop a comment below. Let me know how you're thinking about your withdrawal strategy and whether you've been relying on the 4% rule without questioning it. I read every comment, and your situation might help someone else avoid a disaster. The more informed you are today, the fewer regrets you'll have tomorrow. Now go make it happen.